Hi, I'm Sebastian. I'm from Berlin, actually, even though now I've spent 3 months in India already. But I'm still from Berlin. Um, Maybe start with pirate cinema, how pirate cinema started. Um, just about 3 years ago, with a friend of mine in Berlin, we just noticed at some point that we were actually downloading lots of movies, and that the the result of our downloading was actually that a huge growing archive was actually emerging, like hundreds of films, hundreds of films. So now the question was, like, what do we do with it? And I think both of us felt some sort of anxiety, lots of movies. And of course, quite obviously, after a while, um, an archive was emerging, so growing number of films, hundreds of films. And I think both of us, we felt some sort of was an anxiety become this type of private archivist. Like, what do you do with a huge resource like that? Would we now be on the path to collecting films as people collect stamps? And we both thought, like, no, that can't be the way. We're a bit frightened by that idea that we would now maintain Excel sheets and maintain our order in the archive and just look at the stuff every now and then and be so happy that we managed to download all the stuff. But no, obviously, um, uh, an archive can also be seen as a tool for means of production. And in the case of a movie archive, that quite directly and logically and necessarily led to not just opening it up and giving it around and passing movies on to friends, but actually running a cinema, because that's what we felt this archive could enable one to do. And we started I think in the summer of 2004. We were still at that point not really aware that it would be a series, actually. We just thought, oh, let's at that point send out a mail and call people to come and watch this film. 100 people came to the first screening, and then we kind of continued. And after a short while, it was clear that, okay, we were actually doing something that we would then call Pirate Cinema Berlin, and that this would be a longer series of events. And actually, even though with one interruption, we did it for 3 years, had just about 100 screenings. So the normal mode, how that worked, was weekly screenings every Sunday in the space we have in Berlin. There would be a screening. This is probably not so easy in many other cities, because, like, one of the ingredients, one of the means productions that we would always have in Berlin is space. Large space, cheap space, space that we actually rent ourselves, so that it's not, there's not many cases where we have to make compromises. No, it's our space. We can do kind of whatever we want. And there's also a certain openness in Berlin towards these kind of towards ventures that are not exactly commercial, or that are not exactly, where it's not exactly clear, this is how things normally are. There's certain openness. So the basic rules of pirate cinema were actually always quite simple. We would only screen downloaded movies, only movies that we had actually downloaded from the internet. And then people, the visitors to the cinema, they could copy the film, get a copy of the film right in the place, burn it themselves. Many people, people would bring DVDs, or we would give them CDs, but after a while people would come with hard drives or laptops or whatever, and copy quite a lot. And then maybe the third rule was always to try to make a really good program, and relying on BitTorrent, relying on file sharing, not just on BitTorrent, but in the end mostly, relying on peer-to-peer networks and file sharing technology, gave us access to a huge, like, distributed archive of films that is actually an enormously great resource for doing cinema. So if you run in a place like Berlin, a legal cinema, it's extremely hard to do just the program you want to do, because of copyright issues, because of license fees, because of unavailability of films, because many things are just lost. Whereas this approach to, well, we can have it, so we just do it, kind of also served to demonstrate this enormous quantity of films, and also insane quality and focus in some of these networks when it comes to film. So in a sense, I mean, obviously, quite obviously, pirate cinema was always a cinema. I'm saying was because at the moment it doesn't exist because we've been in India quite some time and haven't been running it. It's obviously not just a cinema, but also a cinema about intellectual property, which is kind of strange in itself. So it tries to make visible or show films that are otherwise maybe inaccessible or too expensive to get, or. But on the other hand, it also always tried to make visible the kind of change that was going on in property relations when it comes to film. The actual benefits of peer-to-peer distribution of films outside the normal legal framework. We found that an enormously important thing also to show and also to look at films that themselves dealt with intellectual property issues, either by addressing them, by disrespecting them, or by finding approaches that went a bit, that maybe developed different or unusual perspectives on these normal general IP confrontations. So that's maybe part one. Yeah. What was interesting, so pirate cinema would be a weekly screening, but we would also mail out either short but sometimes rather lengthy invitation that would either be about the film, or that would of course obviously introduce the film, but also be some remarks about the film, but also talk a bit in general about what we perceived as the crisis or the problems of traditional cinema. Which is not just a crisis of, it's not just saying like, Hollywood is producing films that I don't like. That's quite childish in the end. And that's because of this kind of, the order of production that has been established. Even though it may be true to a certain extent that general industrial production of films at this point in its history may in many cases not produce so interesting results, this kind of box office ideology of like recoup your money in 2 weeks and then see. But that's not so much the point. It's about for example, it's about something quite trivial, which is cinema the space. We noticed when we were starting to download films a lot that at the same time cinema the space became less and less attractive, and not just because suddenly almost everything, so much was available to us, but also because cinema, on the one hand compared to what we could do in our self-organized spaces, but also compared to many other more official spaces, was such a hostile almost place, in the sense that the cinema hall, I mean, there's a certain structure to it. Of course, it has a long history, like how you behave in a cinema room. But mostly these kind of for me, it always ended before the film when these copyright and anti-piracy commercials started, so that actually the people who were actually paying to watch these films were confronted with all these idiotic, stupid and often outrageous kind of clips about what constitutes a pirate and who benefits from piracy and who suffers, etc., etc. So this whole story of there's these people, these small producers in film, these people who just do the light or just do the sound or just do the script or just do the financing, would be whose jobs would be lost because of piracy, even though it's quite obvious that all the problems they try to give this kind of cinema human face, but it was instantly quite obvious that the actual problems that these people were reporting of were much more problems of globalized economy or lack of organization of labor or loan system in the US that actually make their lives miserable, and not the fact that people were downloading the movies they've been involved in for free, which also never really showed up in statistics. And it's really hard to prove that what the financial effects of this are. It's also not the most important point, maybe, because even if one would demonstrate that cinema in its current tradition, in its current form of distribution was going down, then I think you would still have a hard time arguing that just because there's now a segment of an industry that will kind of cease to exist, that that is a reason for fundamentally changing or outlawing large parts of our information infrastructure, which is basically, and that's basically what the only proposal could be, that certain operations on the computer are from now on illegal, and that this kind of traffic we enjoy among peers, which is not just copyrighted material, but email, internet, etc., would have to be regulated a lot more to become safe again for proprietary content production. And this seemed to be, to us, the main occupation actually of proprietary cinema, to make sure that people do not copy, make sure that people are scared of the presented consequences and never actually materializing consequences of piracy, make sure that DVD with this region code doesn't play in this region, make sure that HD digital video doesn't run on a screen that doesn't have a whatever content protection system, make sure you can't copy certain files, make sure this and this expires, which to us seemed actually exactly the opposite, contrary to what cinema had started with, the kind of the project to make things visible, the project to make images, moving images, circulate. So that seemed to us like a strange reversal that we also thought was rarely addressed in discussion about cinema. And so pirate cinema gave us the occasion to actually, to not just, I mean, to both engage in that discourse of intellectual property and cinema in the age of digital reproduction, and on the other hand do something very practical and very as much fun as the discourse, which is running a bar that is a cinema, running a space that is a meeting point for people, and running a place that I think people like to go to for various reasons, be it for classical, like because they want to see films, be it because they know it's a place where they can go and meet people in the end, or whatever brought them to that place. In fact, after running pirate cinema for a while, it was quite obvious, because many people came who worked in film, who were directors and journalists, etc., that actually the film community or something in Berlin was aware of the fact that this cinema existed and was mostly sympathetic to it. Also, like other cinemas, they saw it, and it doesn't really, I think this at least among certain scene of filmmakers, this myth of their own profession being jeopardized by file sharing never really had much of an effect, and they didn't follow that so far. So I think it's fair to say most of the people were sympathetic, even though, of course, they may not join in what our kind of proposals or observations were all the times, because then also quite obviously pirate cinema as an operation is still illegal, and we're taking a certain risk to by running it, and so it depends if someone wants to associate themselves with it or not, even though journalists always seem to write about it from a very sympathetic